Good evening, everyone. I am Don Liacono. I'm the Chief Program Officer here at NAMI Davidson County. Tonight, you are in for a treat. We have Dr. Aaron Brinen here, who's going to be doing his presentation on Beyond Symptoms, Living Well with Psychosis, which comes from his book, Living Well with Psychosis. Uh, I want to just let everybody know that we do these ed sessions usually on a monthly basis. It's usually the third or fourth Wednesday of each month. We are always looking for recommendations for topics, and when we can find presenters, we are always open to bringing more topics to our members here at NAMI. But Dr. Brendan approached me about a month ago, and I said, if you want to do an ed session, I'm all for it. So that's what we're going to do tonight. So, Aaron, why don't you take it from here?
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be back. I always love any chance I can to come talk with NAMI. I've been involved with NAMI for back when I was in Pennsylvania. I was involved in NAMI Manco. I went to Washington, D.C. with NAMI Manco and went and visited Congress and all that. That was way before the pandemic. So NAMI has a big place in my heart, and I'm excited to join you guys tonight. So tonight I want to just talk about this idea of thinking beyond symptoms, right? This idea of living well with psychosis, right? So I'm going to talk a lot about sort of the work that I've done in developing a version of CBT for psychosis that we call recovery-oriented cognitive therapy. Talk a little bit about that, and then really talk about how do we work as a team to put the individual in the position and make sure that they're in the position to be the captain of their own ship, and really talk about sort of what that looks like and how we do that, and think sort of systematically, almost like step by step through that. And at the end, I'll talk about a little bit about how I developed and sort of what my mindset was when I was developing Living Well with Psychosis. And then all along the way, if you have questions about anything, feel free to ask. And we're definitely going to have time at the end for questions. So please think of questions, have questions, feel free to ask questions at the end, or else that will be a very, very long half hour. So, which would be awkward. So we don't want that. So welcome. So the agenda today is we're going to talk a little bit about what is CTR, really thinking about these problems with motivation, problems with connection, and really why do we care about them? Why focus so much on those symptoms? And then really quickly thinking about recovery-oriented cognitive therapy and give you sort of an overview of it. But then really thinking about how do we get back to living well with psychosis? And how do we convert that into sort of a way of thinking about serving individuals and partnering with individuals and really seeing individuals get back to taking control of their own recovery journey. So recovery-oriented cognitive therapy is this idea of a fusion between cognitive therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy and the recovery movement, right? Hopefully, many of you guys or all of you guys really have a good sense of the recovery movement, right? The ideas that we oftentimes hear SAMHSA talking about. Hopefully, if you're a part of the peer movement, this should be sort of the air that we all breathe, right? But the ideas of things like hope, connection, purpose, right? And so these are really important culture and spirit and ideas that should be driving us and should be guiding all of our the way that we think about our approach to recovery. One of the things that happens along the way is how do we enact that? And it's one of the things that I bumped into as I journeyed really initially all around Georgia, around Pennsylvania, in talking with people in the communities. They go, a lot of practitioners were saying, I actually love these. I want to do this, but how do I act? How do we make this happen? And so the idea was that we created this fusion between the recovery movement and that sort of nuts and boltsy know-how that cognitive therapy has, right? So whether you like CBT or whether you hate CBT, I feel like nobody ever denies that CBT knows how to move freight, right? Like that's one thing CBT is pretty well known for, is that like there's stuff that they move along. But one of the things that happened early on in my career was when I was working for Aaron Beck, who was the creator of cognitive therapy. Because when I left graduate school, I had to do a postdoc, which is essentially where you get your hours before you become licensed. And so I went and I completed a postdoc and actually stayed and worked with uh, Dr. Beck for about 10 years. And so he was doing a talk between, at SAMHSA, and there was this conversation about how is CBT, what does CBT and the recovery movement, how are they similar? What do they have in common? And one of the really amazing things that would happen is whenever Dr. Beck had something they had to talk on, he would bring it to his postdocs and ask the question to us. And we had to sort of give him answers ourselves because he would sort of teach us how to think, which is such a really cool experience in your life. At the same time, I was an extraordinarily anxious um, postdoc. I basically had figured somebody made a very, very, very big mistake. They hired me to work with Aaron Beck, and that was a super huge mistake. And so I had started coming to work an hour earlier, and I started reading all of the books that Dr. Beck had written. So that way, at least I was the most prepared mistake that they ever hired. That was sort of my thinking process. Never said it was the healthiest way to think, but hey, we all have our own, thinking problems. But what I was reading at the time was one of his original books, which is called Cognitive Therapy of the Emotional Disorders, which is really one of the purest descriptions of cognitive therapy that Dr. Beck wrote. Now, if you're thinking about reading it, I do have to warn you, it was written in 1976. So there's a whole host of language problems that get baked in when you write something in 1976. And these books don't naturally update as time updates. It's written in 1976. But one of the things I wrote to Dr. Beck is cognitive therapy has always been about recovery. Because when you read Cognitive Therapy of the Emotional Disorders, every heading was a description of one part of the recovery movement. Purpose, connection, right? Hope. They're all written in there. Every section of his original book was there. And on page 9, second paragraph down, Dr. Beck compares the two dominant theories of the day, psychoanalysis and behaviorism. And he describes how neither of those therapies will produce durable recovery. And the reason he says this is that neither of them really go and ask the individual. None of them trust and empower the individual. And he describes how in cognitive therapy, we're helping the patient draw on his own problem-solving apparatus. So Beck, there's a whole lot of problems in that language, I acknowledge. But if you really read what he's describing, Beck believes in 1976 that the solution lies within the individual all along. He believed always that the individual knew their way forward. And the only thing that we as helping professionals bring to it is we know how other people have recovered. And so it's a meeting of two experts. But the captain of the ship that Beck defined back in 1976 was the individual. It was their problem-solving apparatus that they knew how to use. And so Beck describes this in 1976, which is why I really did believe that cognitive therapy and recovery always met together. Now, just because people pushed it away from that as cognitive CBT might have been developed, that's a different conversation for a different presentation. So when we started developing recovery-oriented cognitive therapy, it was an extension of CBT for psychosis, which has a very long history of research, of effectiveness in helping people, but majorly focusing on the hallucinations and delusions, what we think of as the positive symptoms. And what we wanted to do was focus in on those problems with motivation and problems with connection, what people refer to as the negative symptoms, right? The idea that where something should be, it's been removed. Those problems with motivation, problems with connection. And we're going to put those problems first and focus on those for a couple of reasons, some of which I'm going to describe, but mainly one, we don't currently have any treatments, whether pharmacological or even digital therapeutics. We don't currently have any FDA-approved treatments for those problems, right? So that's a pretty good reason to do it. But more so, these are the problems that ultimately lead to problems with quality of life, to more dysfunction, and more likely to go back into the hospital. And so if we're really interested in helping somebody live the life that they want, these are a prime spot to look for. Also, if we don't look for the negative symptoms, something that's not there, we as humans don't naturally look for things that aren't there. We look for things that are there. It's really easy to pay attention to voices or fearful beliefs or things like that. We don't usually pay attention when somebody's not doing something. And so it's more important to think about that. So we're putting these symptoms first. Okay, so negative symptoms when we're thinking about it. Just as a quick reminder for people, rates of reduction in goal-directed activity, motivation, and expression. I like to really describe them as those problems with motivation and problems with connection. The problem with them is that they're oftentimes overshadowed by psychosis, right? Particularly those positive symptoms. And the biggest problem for the negative symptoms is that so many people, right, providers, sometimes family members, and oftentimes individuals themselves, right? Recently, many of the advocates who I follow and I've started becoming a little friendly with, the negative symptoms they've started describing a little bit more openly on their YouTube channels and Instagram. They hold enormous shame. They'll talk about their hallucinations. They'll talk about their strongly held beliefs. And when they come in and their struggles with those. But the negative symptoms, they say it's the hardest thing for them to talk about because of the shame that comes along with it, right? And so oftentimes people mistaken them for depression or laziness, right? And so that's kind of the reason why this is such a toxic symptom for so many people. But if we just think about them logically, like why would we really want to focus on them, right? These symptoms set up this fertile ground. And I think this is stuff that, many of you guys or all of you guys who are on here have probably done the amazing family-to-family training or peer-to-peer training, like one of the amazing NAMI trainings that are out there. And so if we just think about the great NAMI trainings that we've had, right? If we're not motivated, if we don't do stuff and we isolate, what happens, right? Like if I told you I was going to do that, what would most of you guys end up telling me is going to happen, right? What's going to happen to my voices if I isolate and I don't do anything? Are my voices going to get louder or quieter? I'm a little bit of a call and response talker. I know that's a very weird thing to do.
Louder, louder.
Right? What's going to happen to my worries? Am I going to worry more or am I going to worry less?
More.
Right? Same thing, right? I'm going to be taking in less information from my environment. I'm going to have more stress, right? If we really think about it, like I don't know of any symptom, and I've been asking this also, I've been asking this for about 10 to 15 years now. I don't know of any symptom that gets better when you isolate and you don't do anything. Thank you, Thumb, right? If you have something, please message me. I would love to hear what it is. But particularly, I'm not talking about rest. I'm not talking about, taking some me time. I'm talking about isolating and not doing anything. And so oftentimes we're just seeing that even if we can do things to help with the hallucinations and delusions or the scary memories or any of those other problems, we're still leaving a fertile ground on which these symptoms can bloom again. And so that's why those problems with motivation, those problems with connection are such an important target. Again, one of the things that the research started to show, we actually used to go when we first started traveling around Georgia, teaching people to help people get out of state hospitals and get back to the life that they want. We used to actually say in workshops, like, listen, nobody ever got hospitalized for negative symptoms. And we actually ended up being wrong, right? One of the things we found out is that when they looked at it, individuals with negative symptoms, that the negative symptoms occurred earlier on in the disorder, that they're oftentimes missed, that they're associated with poor functioning and poor quality of life, and that they are more predictive of going back into the hospital, right? So level of negative symptoms at discharge are more predictive of going back into the hospital, more than hallucinations and delusions, and more than those problems with memory and attention and executive function, what we call those neurocognitive deficits, which a lot of people went, wait, what? Right? Like, but it's more predictive of going back to the hospital, which is kind of wild if you think about it, right? But if we think it through in the way that we just went over, it's also not, right? Somebody with hallucinations, they can get back to work. They can get back to being with their family and doing the things that they want. But the more we isolate, all of the symptoms have a chance to sort of fire up more. So once we started kind of realizing that this is going to be the target, we did do some research, right? Because I think it's really important. And if you have ever heard me talk, or if you look at any of the stuff that I talk about on YouTube, or any of my writing, one of the things I um, advocate for so much is that whatever we do when we serve individuals, it needs to be driven by the science, right? And I know that for some people that might sound like super cold, except um, I know that these problems, that they hurt, right? And that they steal people from their lives, right? And so we need to bring the best science, because these are really serious, and people deserve to get back to their lives. And the way that we do that is through science, right? And so before we went forward and started doing this, we did a clinical trial in order to get back then, in order to get published in the Archives of General Psychiatry, which was a JAMA Journal of the American, before it became JAMA Psychiatry. You had to have a title like this, so please apologies. And so what we found is we compared standard treatment, which was great standard treatment in Philadelphia, to cognitive therapy plus standard treatment. At the end of it, what we found, we were looking at functioning was the main outcome. Like, are we kind of doing more in your life? We found that people were functioning more, right? They were doing more in their life. We found that their avolition and apathy, which is that sort of motivation and expression, that went down.
I believe Dr. Brennan has frozen. This is part of the downside of Zoom. Hopefully, he'll be back on shortly. Mm, looks like we've lost him now. All right. Well, again, this is the downside of Zoom. I will let him in short when he comes back on. He may be calling me. Do I have any questions while we wait for Dr. Brennan to come back that I could actually answer?
I'll go. So is he saying that people, I guess people know how to help themselves best with maybe some guidance from someone trained, or I guess,
Well, I mean, that's the NAMI philosophy. The NAMI philosophy is that, and Dr. Brennan is a good friend of NAMI and also a proponent of what NAMI stands for, in the sense of we live, people with psychosis, people with any mental health condition live with it 24/7. And with guidance, we are the experts. We are the ones who drive our recovery.
Very, very good. Very, I haven't thought of it that way, but I certainly can agree with that. I just from self, experience. So I just want to make sure I was following.
And again, I do apologize. Hopefully he
Hey
realizes he's.
guys,
There we go.
I had a power surge or something. I'm so
That's fine.
sorry.
It's okay, Aaron. Aaron, I was doing a support group a few weeks ago, and my power went out. And thankfully, George Dial, one of our NAMI Davidson employees, was there too and could pick up the slack. But again, I
Well, the
killed time
funniest
a
thing is
little bit.
I tried to text Dakota to let her know that I was logging back in, and I think what happened was I tried logging back in and the because there was the surge. I don't think my router went back on, so then I jumped onto my cell phone as a
All right.
hotspot. So we
All
should be
right.
good
Well,
from that standpoint, and I should be fine because I'm on a laptop. So I worst case scenario, I lose my external monitor.
all right.
Sorry about that, guys. So live theater.
Put me on the spot, my friend.
There you go. There you go.
Go ahead.
Sorry about that. So, if I was if I was worried about stuff like that, I would think that somebody just did not like the joke that I was about to tell because it's the one I know. So, we compared standard treatment to cognitive therapy plus standard treatment, right? And so what we were really focusing in on was functioning, right? Because it's really about getting people back to living the life that they want, right? Living well with psychosis. And so, at the end of treatment, they did have better functioning. They had reduced avolition and apathy, and avolition and apathy is so avolition and apathy is a reduction in motivation and a reduction in expression. So there's two things you get. So if you reduce a reduction, you get two things. One, you get an increase in motivation and an expression, and you also get an upset English teacher because you're using a double negative. So just to sort of explain that piece of it. So the final part of it is, and this is the part that surprised us, we were targeting those problems with motivation, problems with connection, the negative symptoms. And what we found is that we had a reduction in the hallucinations and delusions as well. We did do a follow-up, and we found that when therapy was removed for 6 months, that all those pieces, right, functioning, negative symptoms, and hallucinations and delusions, those were all maintained when we removed the therapy. So we realized that it wasn't just some loud person like me in the person's face, that actually that there seemed to be a benefit that was maintained. Also, we found that when you divided the individuals into two groups, right, like about length of illness, we found that individuals with a shorter length of illness, right, less than 10 years, that they responded, and they responded at the 6-month mark. But people with a longer length of illness, greater than 10 years, they also responded, but they actually didn't respond until the follow-up period. So it was sort of a tale of two cities, right? So we had the one tale of the earlier responders, and they actually respond really quickly. But it also is a great story that nobody is beyond recovery, right? So even if you've been at this rodeo for a really long time, it's just figuring out what we're going to do and how we get there. And I think that it's just a really exciting message. And also going back to my whole research isn't terrible. It's a beautiful message that we hear, and that message of hope comes from data that lets us know that nobody is beyond recovery. And I think it's so important. Obviously, it's a message that NAMI has been saying forever, and it's an exciting one to hear coming from here. Okay. And this is, I think, exciting message research that comes from across the pond, which is done by a colleague of mine, a guy by the name of Toni Morrison, not that Toni Morrison. And he does all kinds of really amazing research on CBT for psychosis. This one I call Look Ma No Meds. And it's not because it's anti-medicine, but it's really looking to see, can we get benefit in CBT for psychosis for individuals who are not taking medicine? And mainly because there's a group of people who physically can't tolerate medicine. Like they just, there are people who don't respond to medicine at all. And then obviously we know there are some people who just really refuse to take medicine. And so with all of those questions that are out there, there was an empirical question of can people respond? And what we found was that people do, that people can benefit from CBT for psychosis, and they can actually do really well, even if they're not taking medicine. So one of the messages I take from this study is we don't need to wait to start psychotherapy for people to get better on medicine and be stable before we start getting them engaging them with psychotherapy, right? In his most recent study where he compared psychotherapy to medicine to a combination of the two, it's not surprising that the combination group did best, but each of the monotherapies did equally well. And so I think we can really support the idea of individuals and their choice, which was kind of an exciting outcome that we found. So one of the things we start to see, and this is going to be thinking about how do we start living well with psychosis, is that the place we start is not with the problems, but the place we start is with motivation. Where do you want to be going? What do you want your life to look like? And as we start getting more motivated, right, we start realizing that people start doing more in their life. As we start doing more in our life, and that's functioning, right, we sort of have less time for the junk in our brains, right? And so for the individuals we serve and the individuals that we love, right, the junk in our brains oftentimes can turn into hallucinations and delusions, right? And so whether that's you wake up in the morning and you spend a lot of time worrying, and so those all turn into hallucinations and delusions, or in the middle of the day, you have time to sort of worry and your self-confidence gets lower and those turn into hallucinations and delusions, whatever those are. But if you start doing more in your life, you just have less time for that. But as you have less of the hallucinations and delusions, gosh, that's kind of motivating, right? And as you're a little bit more motivated, you start doing a little bit more in your life. And as you do a little bit more in your life, you have less time for the junk. As you have less time for your junk, you're motivated more. And around we go, and this beautiful cycle starts to emerge for recovery. And that's really sort of the heart of this idea of living well, and really moving beyond symptoms, but really thinking about what are these things that are motivating people to move forward, right? And how do we get toward those things? And so ultimately, this starts to reveal this approach to therapy, right? So what we want to do is sort of reach through and connect with the individual on that very human level, what we call activation, right? It's those really those conversations that we all have, right? It could be food or sports or Broadway musicals, which is my favorite way to connect with people. It could be the rain that just came through, right? Which was a lot more fun before it knocked out the power and had Dawn tap dancing for us, right? It could be, any of those things that we just love to talk about, right? But I mean, anybody here on this talk right now, anybody here a cook? Really love cooking, right? You could show hands. Thanks, Dee. Yeah, I'm a huge cook, right? Anybody here not a cook? Let's do that one too, right? Okay, awesome. Anybody here who's not a cook accidentally ask a cook about cooking, and that's like 10 minutes of your life you'll never get back again? That's activation, right? When we get excited. Also, by the way, that happens to me all the time when I talk to people about sports, right? I go, oh, and then they tell me about like the Eagles or the Titans, and it's like 20 minutes of my life I never get back again. Do I mind? No, I love connecting with people. I love talking to people. But it's that way that sort of, we just sort of feel like we feel like alive and like, and connected to the things that are really important in our lives, right? And so once we have that, we want to identify those personal, meaningful, valued goals, those aspirations, those things that are really important to us, right? And it's really those big picture things that we want, right? I think so often, and listen, I'm going to be really honest about it. It's my people that do that are oftentimes the biggest culprit of this, right? We identify these goals, right? And the reason I call them aspirations is I feel like the individuals I serve have been goaled to death. And I don't know if that's true. You guys can all raise your hands or not, but like, how many people here have been goaled to death? Like, you get asked, well, what's your goal? And then they ask it, and then like they never come back and they never ask about it again, right? Or they tell you the goal, and the goal is like, how many people here when you were 7 years old say, gosh, when I grow up, I really hope I can like take all of my medicine regularly, right? That never motivated any of you guys. Never motivated, wouldn't have motivated me, right? Also, by the way, I'm like currently, because I'm getting old, taking like a medication regularly. It's so hard. It's so hard, right? When I was writing the book, one of my residents like sent me all this really cool research on how pharmacists, like people who like medicine, are terrible at remembering medicine regimens. It's so hard to remember it. And I have an app to remind me to take 2 pills in the morning and 2 pills at night. And it's so hard. So all that to be said, we want something a little bit more exciting than take your meds and shower, right? To really motivate us to get out of bed every day, right? So it's exciting things, right? Like I want to take my son to go see colleges, right? I want to I want to go visit my niece and watch her play Minecraft, right? I want to I know. Like, listen, and yet I still, Candace, I literally wake up in the morning and go, oh my gosh, I forgot it, right? I also was never a tisk psychologist. I want to also point that out, right? Anybody here who knows me knows I'm not a tisk. I'm like, yeah, man, it's hard. Let's just figure it out. So I'm also not a tisk psychologist. I want to throw that out there. Not that there's a lot of them out there, um, but those like really important things, right? Like I want to get my own apartment. I want to date. I want to get married. Like those really big things that like motivated all of us, like when we were younger. Those are the things that are going to let us sort of like fight this fight to get back to living well with, and that the obstacles are just sort of these things that are in the way. They're just these side pieces that we can sort of figure out along the way. I will answer that question in just a sec, Darla, but I'll come right back to that, I promise. And so we have all of these ways of understanding these problems that allow us to tackle them a little bit better. I think one of the mistakes that we oftentimes have is we don't have an understanding of what's going on, right? We don't sort of figure out like how the car engine works. So then we try to sort of do stuff to the car engine, and then it doesn't feel like we're really helpful in getting it to work better, right? I don't know how car engines work. So I never work on my own car engine, right? Like I would never put my hand even close to my car engine, right? Like jumping a car freaks me out, right? Like, and so I know, don't judge me, guys, please. And so in order to fix my car, I need to understand how my engine works. And yet so often when we're talking about these really serious, scary problems, we kind of just are like, well, let's just jump in and start doing stuff at it. But if we could stop and understand how all the pieces and pistons are working together, then we're going to be more effective in figuring a way to get back to moving toward where we want to be going, right? As we do this, we also want to learn these new lessons about ourselves, right? So just to answer Darla's question really quickly, psychosis can start for a number of different reasons. They can obviously, one of the ways is can start from substance abuse. Really severe alcohol use can bring on psychosis. For some group of people, when they stop using, it will subside and they'll be the psychosis will go away. And for another group of people, it will hang on. And so the psychosis will stay around, right? And so for those people, they might go on and they might end up getting another diagnosis along the way. So I hope that answers the question pretty well. So with all of this understanding of this treatment that I helped to co-develop and sort of how we do it, now let's think about how do we get back to living well with psychosis, right? How do we move beyond symptoms and how do we put somebody in there? And really when we're thinking about it is, who's the captain? Who's the captain of the ship? And one of the things that I argue, and I mean, I've argued forever, I just finally put it on paper, is that the individual is always the captain of the ship. right? In psychotherapy, it's a meeting of two experts. The individual is the expert in their own life. Nobody knows better why they're experiencing what they're experiencing and where they want to go and what they need more than the individual. And the only thing I have to offer is how many people have recovered, right? So the best I am is a navigator, right? I can give good advice, but a captain needs to make the decision because it's their ship and they know where we need to go. So my argument is that the individual is the captain. But as I argue in the as I'd like to think about it, being a captain, tough gig, right? We need knowledge, right? A good captain has a lot of knowledge. And a good captain is also going to require a lot of leadership skills, right? They need to know how to coach and talk to all of the navigators and all of the people who are working with them on this journey. And so that means coaching them when they're not doing their job. It's coaching them when they're not communicating well. And also thinking about ways to sort of set boundaries to make sure that that person is doing their job and staying sort of in their lane. And I'm going to remind you, the captain is the individual, right? They also need a plan. And the plan that I'm going to argue is this very simple, elegant intervention that we call activity scheduling, right? Which is monitoring, which it could be monitoring, increasing, and evaluating the activity in our day, right? And it's sort of this wonderful map by which we can sort of move through this journey. If you don't think that there's a lot of nautical images in this in the rest of the slideshow, you really don't know where this thing's going. So the captain next needs to sort of start on this journey of sort of learning, right? Because unlike most captains who sort of like work their way up and learn and go to school for captaining, I don't know. I feel like I'm really going to have a lot of trouble if I don't get this more information about the analogy. This captain has been tossed into this world that they do not want to be in, oftentimes, or I guess I'm saying oftentimes. I'm assuming like nobody really wants to be in this world, right? This is not a world that the world of mental health treatment. And they're a captain of a ship that they didn't ask to be put in charge of. And there's a lot of requirements, and everybody around them, most of the people around them have more information, and many of them went to school for multiple years for the very topic that the individual is the captain around. And so some of the lessons that they're going to need to start gathering information around so that they're able to have good discussions around things like treatment. What are the types? Who are the providers, right? Also understanding what is this weird diagnosis thing that people keep talking about, right? Because all of a sudden, everybody's using all of these super weird yet highly terrifying terms that you've never heard of, or you have heard of and you didn't like it when you have heard of them before. And so understanding why are people using these diagnoses, and then what are they and what do these different diagnoses mean? And then really important, the captain needs to learn about self-advocacy. How do they set the lines of what's okay and what's not okay, right? And so these are starting that process of the captain getting this sort of huge lay of the land of where they're at. The captain also is going to start thinking about what are some of these unwritten rules, right? Like in any endeavor we've ever gone into, any job you've ever started, right? There's the rules that they hand you in the booklet, and then there's all of the real rules, right? The hidden rules, the hidden obstacles, right? And those are going to be things like stigma, guilt, shame, hopelessness, so many myths that you could, you could fill a library full of them, right? And none of those things are written down in any diagnostic manual. They're not written down anywhere. And so, yet the captain, the individual, is going to face these regularly right? And probably face these problems more than the stuff that's listed in the diagnostic manual. These are much more difficult to deal with than what's written in the diagnostic manual. And so the weapon, the tool that the captain's going to use to move against that is really going to be aspirations, right? It's really deciding that if we figure out where your North Star is, where you're going to be going, right? Does shame and guilt and hopelessness, can it creep in? Yes. But when that North Star is so bright and we keep our eye on it, it helps us to navigate, which is what the North Star was always for. And so we keep our eye on it, and it keeps us motivated to move forward. And it's something that we can share in that isn't about our brokenness. It's about returning to this of living well. Whether the captain wants to learn about medication or whether the captain does not want to learn about medication, I've always found, I don't know how other people are on this call, but I've always found that the things I want to know the least about are the things that I oftentimes try to make sure I know the most about, because otherwise, at one point I was an actor in LA, and I remember sitting in a class, and somebody said, if you don't learn how to take care of your money, somebody else will take care of your money for you. And I think medication is a very important topic like that. And so there's so much, and in fact, medication is probably, even though the focus, what we want to have in this whole idea is getting beyond symptoms, probably some of the largest amount of time we're going to spend is thinking about how do we deal with these medications, right? Because even though we're getting beyond symptoms, we need to figure out how we have these conversations about medications, or else the conversation about medication keeps coming up, right? So they're obviously the basic ones, like what are these things, right? I once knew this radiologist who said to me, listen, the reason I became a radiologist is there are so many medications. Every one of them has like 3 names. They all do the same thing, but they don't do the same thing. And they all interact in weird ways. Like, so I became a radiologist, so I don't ever have to deal with medicine, right? And I always thought that that was a really funny thing. And so if somebody all of a sudden falls into this world and like all of a sudden now this is the world they're living in, where it's like every day it's like, well, there's this medicine and this medicine and this medicine. And if you Google them, they're terrifying and they sound like they're being used for something else, right? It could be really confusing. So the first thing the captain needs to do is figure out what the heck are these medicines? What are they for? What do they do? Like, what are they, right? Just the basics of it, right? Why am I taking them, right? And what exactly are they going to do, right? There is no medicine that sort of gets rid of schizophrenia, right? Like that's not what it does, right? Medicines do very specific things, but what they do when they do them well, they do them actually pretty well. But if we know specifically what it's going to do, then when we take the medicine, we can figure out, does it do it? Does it not do it? Right? The next part of it is the captain needs to know how to talk with his crew, his or her crew, about, or their crew, about how to negotiate about medicine, how to have conversations about medicine that aren't in a flooded high emotion, but how do you have productive conversations about medicines, right? And that is worth its weight in gold, right? And then the captain really needs to also have an understanding of, can they come off of them? Can they not come off them? And what does that process look like? How do they have conversations with people about that? So that way everybody's rowing in the same direction, right? And so as you can see, medicine, and that's not even all the conversations of things like shot, no shot, right? There's like it's a very, very complicated thing. And in fact, ironically, in a book that's called Living Well with Psychosis, that is really not about medicines or anything like that, I do believe this is the longest chapter in the whole book, is the medicines chapter, which thought was somehow I thought was highly ironic. So, families. I think the captain needs to understand how to engage your family, right? One, by the time the captain gets into the captain's chair, I don't know. I think that's more Star Trek than nautical, but we're all friends now. It can be a rough early part of the journey, right? And so part of it could be everybody getting back on the same page, right? And so the captain understanding where the family's coming from, the family understanding where the captain's coming from, and then everybody figuring out how do we get back to rowing in the same direction, right? And this is not, when we're talking about families, two things. One, we're obviously talking families in the broad stroke of what a family is, right? Right. So families can be any number of groups. Obviously, they can be parents and siblings and grandparents. They can also be neighbors and extended family and helpers, or any number of people can end up being in that role of family. It's also important to understand that getting family on the same page and getting them back isn't an excuse for when family isn't in a place to be on the team, right? So there's sort of some conversations about that. There's some families are not in a place to be of help. So we're not excusing families that are not being at their best. So that sort of helps the captain get like a lay of the land to the best of their ability, especially a captain who has been all of a sudden, upgraded to captain very oftentimes very, very quickly. So the next part of this journey in getting beyond your symptoms is really starting to get an understanding of what are the specific obstacles that can get in our way, right? Right. There's and I kind of like alluded to this before. Part of it is sort of understanding these obstacles, right? How do they work, and where does the captain have their control, right? How can we sort of exert power over these obstacles? And how can we exert them immediately, right? Right now, right? Because probably while you're all sitting here, you probably don't have any access to a physician who could change something for you. I mean, like, obviously you could probably call like an emergency or something like that. But for the most part, if you can sort of do something yourself to sort of take control, it's probably going to be really helpful. So we're really thinking about how do we take control in our own way? And then figuring out what are these practical approaches to really getting back to your recovery and taking control of your own life. And in that, also being able to bring sort of all of the people on your team along and giving them their specific roles as well. So these are things like motivation and connection, right? We're really going to be starting by looking at these problems with motivation and connection, by developing an understanding of why do these things happen, and then also really focusing in on what are things that we can do to sort of get around those problems with motivation and connection in just simple, practical ways to get people back. The next thing that we need to really focus in on, though, is moving toward what people think of as those positive symptoms, hallucinations and delusions, right? Those are things like voices and visions. Those are things like unfounded or unrealistic threat beliefs, and even those beliefs of exceptionality, right? What people sometimes think of as grandiose delusions, right? But if we can sort of figure out those pieces and develop an understanding so we can be effective in taking control of those and working with those obstacles so we can get back to living well, right? To move beyond them. And then things like anger, right? And communication disturbance, right? Those problems with getting our words out when we sort of are tangential or it takes forever to get our words out. Figuring out how do we deal with those problems when they come up? How do we deal with anger? Because Anger is, first of all, a natural emotion, but it oftentimes can derail our attempt to get back to living the life that we want to live. And then finally, really those times when the past really haunts us, those things from the past can haunt us, and also the times when hopelessness preys on us, right? In those times where we feel like life isn't worth living, right? Hopelessness can sort of sneak in like a vampire and really sort of pull us down and pull us from that life that we want to have, right? And so in all of those things, we need the captain to become an expert and knowledgeable and know when to pull in their other people, but really empowering the captain in the way that captains really have a large knowledge base. But the only reason we're focusing on all those things is really the most important part of it. It's about getting back to living your life. Things like getting back to friends and lovers, right? Getting back to those things like dating, connecting with the friends that you've had, making new friends. How do we do that, right? Whether we've fallen out of that process for a couple months, a couple years, a couple decades, how do we get back to it, right? I definitely believe anybody who knows me knows that I am both a pragmatist and a romantic, which sounds like a really weird thing to hold in one brain. And so I am a big romantic about, the power of love and seeing people together. But I'm also a pragmatist that when you are dating somebody and that's going really, really well, you oftentimes don't have a lot of time to sit around worrying because you're just really busy doing stuff. And I've seen that play out a lot of times. If it's obviously we're looking for good, healthy relationships, things like that. But it also brings up a lot of concerns like, when do I tell my friends, right? What do I say to them? When they ask, where have I been? What have I done? So we need to sort of have those things in our minds so that way we're not getting really anxious as we're starting to get back into those things. And then also starting to tackle some of those questions about the real part about getting back to, especially when we're talking about dating, right? Because, dating isn't just going and getting coffee, right? And so for many people, they might feel really uncomfortable, might be going, well, how do I get back to dating? How do I do that? Some people may have not sort of been on the dating scene and been physical in a little while. Some people, the journey that they took derailed them at the time when they would have been sort of experimenting and getting into these things. And so the captain needs to have a plan for whatever their journey has been, right? Oh, you're very welcome, Sarah. Thank you for coming. Good to meet you. So obviously, if we're thinking about friends and lovers, we're thinking about work and school, it sort of is like Freud's statement, what it is to be human is to work and to love, right? And so work and school, it's all of those things about sort of planning to get back to school. There's an amazing book. And I'm so sad that I bumped into this book after I published my book, or else it would be in my reference book. And I think it's my copy of it's downstairs. It is called Mind Over Meetings. It's written by an advocate named Cody Green. And he's an advocate. He goes by schizophrenic hippie on all of his platforms. And so a lot of people know him. He's the guy who has he has the service dog who greets his visual hallucinations. If the service dog doesn't greet the visual hallucination, he knows it's a hallucination. A lot of people know him from like the internet for that one. But he wrote an amazing book. I've listened to it on Audible, but it's an amazing book about getting back to work. And he went back to school to become an HR professional. And so it's just really very nuts and boltsy about how to ask for accommodations, get accommodations, talks you through so much. There's a lot in my book that is quite similar, but also on the same side, his gets way deeper into it. So if I get to add something in when they do the next run of the publishing, I'm going to add his book to mine. But the captain wants to be thinking about like, planning about how do you get back into whether it's work or school, and thinking about the name of the book is Mind Over Meetings. Oh, that did not work well. So, um, but planning to get back in. Also, the same thing about self-disclosure. Who do you talk to? Getting accommodations and how important it is to ask for the accommodations ahead of time. And then also thinking about those skills for focusing to make sure that we have the ability to do that. And then finally, this idea of your body is your temple, right? And so, and it's really important to for us to make sure that we're focused on taking care of our bodies, right? If we're going to get back to living our lives, and we're going to get back to our friends, and we're going to, friends and lovers, and get back to work and school, right? And doing all this great stuff, and we're going to, get all this stuff back. Like, wouldn't it be a super huge bummer to like have our body, fail us? Thank you so much, Dakota. And so when we're thinking about it, one of the things people oftentimes say to me when I'm serving them is they go, "Oh, Dr. Brinen, I don't want to do any of this. I want to go natural." And I think a lot of times providers get really freaked out when people say, "I want to go natural. I want to do it naturally." Also, I think they think it's just code for like, I want to just smoke weed. But just, we're all friends now. We'll all be honest. It's so, but I've always thought that it's the best thing in the world, right? All of us have a million sayings, and like that all point to the value of doing natural things for our mental wellness, right? Things like exercise, right? Into the mountains I must go to lose my mind and find my soul, John Muir, right? Diet, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Sadly, I found out from an allergist that apples are really just a ball of sugar and had no actual, dietary benefit other than a little bit of fiber. So sorry to bum you out. I know, right? Ashley, it kills me. I can't. It really makes me sad. Sleep, early bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. All of these things, right? And so we want plans about all of those things to sort of care for the basic pieces of it. And then also sort of thinking about substances, right? In our lives, right? Obviously, so the two deadliest substances. Does anybody know what two substances kill more people each year? What two drugs kill more people each year? Anyone want to guess?
I'm guessing nicotine's one of them.
And what's the other one?
For me, caffeine.
No, I made a video about that. Alcohol. Thank you, Candace. Yeah. The two legal drugs kill more people every year. That behavior. Right. And so, but I mean, just sort of thinking about it and understanding it and making sense of it. Right. And so having a plan around that. And I mean, honestly, just taking a look and understanding cannabis and taking a wide-eyed look at those pieces too. And then the final part is go to the doctor and let the doctor doctor. And if you don't like your doctor, find a doctor that's not a jerk, right? Like, I mean, and I write about it. Actually, it's really funny because I was writing about it, and then my editor wrote to me and goes, "The doctor's name that you put in the list, that's not your actual primary care physician, is it?" And then I go, well, not now that I changed it, right? So my primary care physician thought it was hilarious that I did that. But we talk about all those pieces, right? So when we're thinking about pulling it all together, right? So this whole way of putting somebody in charge of making sure that they're the captain of their own ship, right? This is what was pulled together in this idea, right? So I was approached with this idea of writing a book directly to individuals, right? This idea of living well with psychosis, right? And it was for individuals. Obviously, and I've heard this from many parents now, that obviously it's really, actually the first parent that I heard it from, honestly, was my mom. She called me at this really creepy hour in the morning. It was like, because she knows when I when I drive to Vanderbilt. And so she would call me at like a time she shouldn't have called me. So I thought something happened. I'm like my stepdad or somebody, right? Everybody here knows what I'm talking about. Like when a parent calls you at like the wrong time and you freak out. Thank you, Don. So, and so, but she had actually just woken up. She woke up and she had grabbed the book and she had it before it was out. And she goes, this book isn't just for individuals with psychosis. This could really help parents. And she had woken up early and she couldn't put it down. She almost missed going to work. And of course, like as a 49-year-old, I was still like, my mommy likes my book. And then as an author, I was like, this isn't a person who has no experience with psychosis whatsoever. And I mean, not that my mom hasn't really listened to my work, but she's like, great, right? But like, and she really, really found it. So it's for family members, it's for providers, it's really, really for this. But I really wrote it as a companion for somebody when they're dropped into this world, right? And the idea is to counter some of the negative books that are out there, the ones that are about surviving schizophrenia and all these ones that just profit on the brokenness mentality, which is so untrue. But the idea is also to simplify the message and try to join in creating this pragmatic guide, right? And then setting a tone for everybody on the team, right? So anybody who's reading this gets the message, right? Who's the captain? They're the captain, right? Why are we writing alcohol over and over again? You'll have to tell me why everybody wrote alcohol in there. Yeah. Oh, you answered my question, right?
Yeah.
And then, empowering the individual, right? Putting them in the captain's seat. But also the idea, right, that it highlights their responsibility, right? And not in a bad way, but with great power comes great responsibility. And so this is from page 1, right? And it goes, who knows better what you're experiencing? Who knows what matters to you? Who knows where you're going? Who more than you? There can be only one captain of a ship, and the best person for the job is the one who knows where we're going. The rest of us, family members, doctors, friends, partners, book authors, are simply good navigators. And that's the focus of this book. And it's the focus where we should all be when we're serving individuals to live well with psychosis. So that's sort of what it is. I want to open it up for people who are interested in, you can follow me in like a gazillion different places. I am getting very active on YouTube. So there are lots of and actually ironically, like almost every video is definitely under 7 minutes. I think they're all like 5 minutes and below. So they're actually really quick videos of things like activity schedule, things just like little pieces of information. So if you're interested, I don't really get anything of it other than entertainment. So feel free to check it out on YouTube and share with people. And they're stuff from the book, stuff from my own work, getting out there. So Candy said, I love the idea of this book and the title. I really dislike the notion that those with psychosis are in constant hell. Giving autonomy to someone with psychosis is a powerful method. Thank you. I'm glad. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I appreciate our webinar. I just bought a copy of the book. Oh, thank you. What would you say to someone whose psychosis has impacted all of their close and intimate relationships? So what I would say is, I mean, I'd want to know a little bit more exactly what it is, but I also recognize that not everybody wants to unmute and talk on a webinar. And I know everybody just loves hearing my voice still. So, well, I think the first thing I would say is that I'm really sorry because nobody deserves this. And the one thing I know is that psychosis has this sort of sneaky way of finding its way in, right? The other thing is I've always been amazed at the resilience of, and this is going to sound very overly optimistic or Pollyanna or whatnot. And it's not everybody, but over and over again, people who have really, really struggled with psychosis, I mean, gosh, man, I've been doing this for 15 years in psychosis, right? Or yeah. And I'm never I never stop being amazed at how families really want to come back together. I mean, there are definitely families out there that are just like not great people. Like there's problematic, right? There are those people out there, and I know they're out there. I bumped into them myself, right? But the number of families that like when relationships get disrupted, um, it's not a joy in saying goodbye. And there's oftentimes a yearning. And so as people recover, I I like to believe that if space is given and we think it through, there can be. And if there isn't, then there are other places. So I would have to know a little bit more than that, but that would be what I would say is I think you guys kind of get the vibe. I'm very much a hopeful guy. So I'm always like looking for the I'm always looking for the ray over the ray of sunshine that's coming up over the even at the darkest of times. So I also want to clarify um and some of the people on here know me and know the work that I've done. This hasn't come from me like working with like the worried well and just like doing treatment of like everybody everything's going great for, right? Like this is not, this comes from going to really dark places, but also seeing really beautiful um, sunrises along with it. So, oh, the questions are going faster, so I should answer them quicker. How do you start the knowledge gathering to activate the motivation? The simple part that I would say is it's really that activity scheduling. That one, there is a video on it's like a pretty brand new video on activity scheduling. It's also a funny thing in the book. If you even just want to read the on Guilford.com, they have a sample chapter, which is the first chapter. And my editor said, "Are people going to be like annoyed that you're asking them to do something in the first chapter?" I'm like, "No. People are tired of being yacked at. They just want to say like, what are we going to do?" Right? So it's activity scheduling, which is that sort of just starting to notice, right? Like, I mean, if you think of anybody on here who struggles with motivation, actually, ironically, Sabrina, there are 3 videos right now on the YouTube channel that all have to do with motivation. There is activity scheduling. There is how to go small when motivation's too hard to do, and then when you don't experience any pleasure, how to start experiencing pleasure again. So there's actually 3 new videos up there right now, and I think the longest one is like 5.5 minutes. So they're really easy to watch too. And if you watch them at 2 times speed, they're very fast. Yeah, my editor was like, "Are people going to be annoyed?" And I'm like, "No, I don't think so." But if you think about if anybody had trouble with motivation, think about a day this week where you just really didn't have any motivation and you didn't do anything, right? You stayed around the house, you may have stayed in bed, you may have stayed on the couch, may have watched sort of as much NCIS as you could. Um, um, and so you kind of watch that whole thing. And now think about like what happened to your motivation that day. Was there another day where maybe you had a doctor's appointment, maybe a friend or a parent just they needed your help. It was a pain in the neck, but you did it anyway. But when you did it, you went and got a cup of coffee, and then somebody texted you and you decided to help them out. So you went and grabbed some groceries for them. Which day did you have more energy? Which day did your motivation go up a little bit more? Did you see a difference between the 2 days? Right? If you did, right, we can start kind of constructing around those pieces, right? And so that's sort of the beginning to start looking into it. So that's sort of a quick intro along the question about motivation. So
I think we're at what causes psychosis?
okay, awesome. And I saw Daniel's thing about that. You're very welcome. What causes psychosis? That is a really complicated question. And honestly, I think it's a question that people are still trying to answer. So I'm going to answer it from the way that, so it's a complicated combination of biology and environment in a massive interaction. We know that prior to the onset of those strongly held beliefs, particularly those threat beliefs, what people sometimes refer to as delusions, that individuals are oftentimes highly stressed. They're spending a lot of time thinking about what bad things can happen next. There's oftentimes a massive toll on their self-confidence. They start feeling worse about themselves, and they really start withdrawing from people around them. They may start experiencing these sort of what we call anomalous experiences, which may be voices, visions, feeling things that are different. They may just feel this overwhelming sense of anxiety, which makes them want to pull back more. As they start to shut in, they start paying a lot more attention to these experiences. As they pay more attention to these experiences, it sort of locks in this fear and threat, right? And they also stop taking in more information. And so we know that anywhere between a week to 6 months before that locking in of those threat beliefs, those are the things that are we're seeing are really sort of exploding. We also know that there is oftentimes a huge prevalence of really nasty things that happen sort of earlier on in life, whether we're talking about things like bullying, other forms of trauma that can happen. We know that it's more likely to happen if somebody's coming from sort of like a more urban area, people have come from other areas, things like that. So those are some of the things that we can think about. I think most people on here have probably heard about sort of some of the biological explanations that people have, but understanding that there are huge psychosocial explanations of the things that can bring it on as well. So is that helpful, George? James, thank you so much I'm glad you like the burgundy. That's why I wore the burgundy jacket today to match.
So, Dr. Brennan, does tapping help with psychosis to stimulate the nervous system?
I would have to sort of, I always like to acknowledge when there's something that I'm not really sure about. I think if a person finds it valuable and they're finding it good, I always say whatever you're doing, if you find that you do it and in the short run it feels better, but then you have to keep doing it more and more, then whatever that behavior is, whether it's tapping or pacing or whatever, it's probably helping your anxiety. It's probably protecting your anxiety and it's not protecting you. Does that make sense? So if you do the tapping and it feels better in the short run, but then immediately the anxiety and the psychosis comes back, it's probably a behavior that's really helping it. It's helping your psychosis. It's not helping you. And so that's always sort of a dead giveaway. If you find that you do the tapping and then the psychosis goes away for the night and you can go and, watch an episode of Wednesday or whatever TV show you like to watch, or you can sit out on your porch and enjoy some tea and chit chat and listen to records, then that's great. So unfortunately, tapping is not something that I'm particularly knowledgeable about. Sorry, Darla.
All right, here's another question. How many instances of psychosis in a given day or week are quote unquote too many, where you should probably go back to your psychiatrist and get a medication modification?
I think that that's something to decide in concert with your psychiatrist, and I think also in concert with your psychologist, right? So there are people who I've served over the years who they're constantly in a state of experiencing psychosis, and we're working on psychosocial ways to help with that, right? Like, getting up in the morning, using a routine, making sure that we're doing the routine when we wake up in the morning instead of like, I don't know, like getting on YouTube or something like that, and then just like worrying and experiencing it, like whatever those things are. There's a group of people who the change in the medicine might not ultimately help, right? It just might create sort of so much sedation. I think it's always important to keep your psychiatrist in the loop and say, hey, this is what's going on. But then discuss what would the increase in medication be. But I think it's also a personal thing. Some people are going to go, this is too much tuna for me. I need something different. And um, hearing voices once every other day is too much for you. So you go back and you want to do it. Other people, they're hearing their voices all day long and they know how to manage with that. That's something that they can deal well with. So
I'm gonna go off the chat, and Dakota has their hand up.
yeah.
Dakota, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, question. So the model is kind of, I guess, putting healthcare back into the hands of the people that we serve. It's like a long history of like, doctors, mental health, care workers, like we have all the answers and whatnot. How do you implement this model in the workplace that's been like for a long time has kind of been the other way around? How do you put that back in place or put it in place?
I had a colleague in the Netherlands and they were allowed to do this. He said, I get a really big stick and when they don't do it, but I mean, you can only do that in the Netherlands. Um, uh, this has sort of been my kind of, life's work, right? Is going into these systems and uh, working with them to see, is there a better way to do it? So my belief is that every person in the mental health system, and maybe it's not every person, but most people in the mental health system really are there because they want to help individuals, right? I don't think you go to medical school and choose psychiatry because you're like, like there's much more lucrative specialties. I mean, just to be like frank, right? You're not going into it for the bucks, right? Like that's not what this is about. It's true for psychology, right? And then if you do go into psychology, you don't go into like treating psychosis because you're doing it for like the big bucks, right? Like, I believe that every person who's serving individuals is doing this because they desperately want to help people. That being said, that doesn't necessarily mean that we ultimately stay true to our desire, right? We can oftentimes lose sight of our values in our day-to-day and notes and all that stuff. And so I think the first part of it is helping providers develop an understanding and seeing individuals as individuals and humans again, and seeing them as daughters and sons, as brothers and sisters, as mothers and fathers, and helping them start to remember why they went into this field, and not in a shaming way, because nobody changes their behavior when they feel ashamed. People change their behavior when there's something that they want to move toward. The next part is making sure that they can understand these experiences in a way that makes sense. And so once it's understandable and it's not just this like neurons misfiring that we need to like medicate it out of, right? And we start seeing that voices are something that we're in relation to, that these are experiences that people are having, then we help people to have a success experience, and see maybe there's a better way of doing it. And then it's all about zombie bites, right? The way a zombie apocalypse happens is that a zombie, sorry if this is gross, but a zombie apocalypse or a zombie outbreak happens through bites, right? So one zombie bites a person, and then that person turns into a zombie, and then ultimately it spreads. And so it's about zombie bites and getting people sort of infected with this passion for serving individuals and seeing them as individuals. Because I think once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you feel it, you can't go back to the other way. And honestly, I'll tell you as a personal example, there have been a couple of times where I've sort of stepped over the line, and I think it came from a point of fear where I moved into a more controlling stance, and I felt it the moment it happened. It felt gross. It felt horrible, and I really apologized to the individual. And the individual even said, like, "What are you apologizing about?" Right? Like, but I could just feel it, and it just felt so bad. So I think that's what it is, and I think it's slow. But I think it's also then collecting data to show that this is a better way of doing it. So
All right. I'm going to take one more question from Andrew, and then I'm going to ask the two questions in the chat, and then we're going to wrap it up to respect everyone's time, especially Dr. Brennan, who's taking time out of his schedule tonight to do this. But Andrew, what question do you have?
Anthony.
Anthony, I'm
Anthony.
sorry.
Oh, okay.
Sorry
Okay.
about that. Sorry about that.
I just want to make sure you're calling me. That's okay. All right. So I just and I don't know if there's a simple answer or a yes or no on this, but I'm just kind of looking over psychosis just to understand it and make sure I understand everything. But so just real quick on delusions is a strongly held false beliefs. So there's a lot of people, whether that they or I'll just say for myself, whether I've been, conditioned or trained or, taught a certain way, or people that hold beliefs that are false but believed to be true. Or maybe somebody's convinced because somebody else has told them or whatever. I guess the big question is, does everybody have psychosis at some point, depending on situation, or is it just is that something totally different than what we're talking about? Does that make sense?
It does. It does. There's a really great book if you want to look into it called Paranoia by Daniel Freeman. And so it's a really great book for two reasons. One, Daniel Freeman is the foremost researcher in paranoia and mistrust that we have. He's currently the chair of the Department of Psychology at Oxford University. And so it's really a great read because it's somewhere between like a memoir of his journey through studying mistrust, and it's also a review of his research. So it's kind of like a story meets like a review of research. And so he kind of like shows that this very, very solidly clear line is not like even a line or solid or clear or anything. And so a better way to think of what people refer to as delusion and is to define it as an unfounded or unrealistic threat belief when we're talking about persecutory delusions, right? And so because and it really takes it away from this idea that it's false, right? Because there's a reason an individual believes that. And there was a great line from a podcast Daniel created for the BBC called The History of Delusions, where one of the individuals said, "I put the puzzle together, but I got the wrong picture." I think that's a better way of seeing it. It's not, instead of thinking of it as false, there are reasons it all makes sense. And I think you're sort of picking up on this idea that we kind of live in a time where so many people think things that are clearly seem false, right? And
Yeah,
so this
yeah.
idea that we could say that everybody's mind works perfectly well, it never has. And so I don't know that I'd say everybody's delusional. I say that I think the one thing everybody's delusional about is the idea that the human mind works really perfectly and infallibly. The human brain is not a computer.
And
Okay,
that,
thank you.
yeah, thank you. That reminds me of tabling once in an event where an older person came up to me and said, "In my day, we didn't have all these mental illnesses," and I just smiled kindly. So anyway, two questions, then we're going to wrap it up. Does DBT also help with psychosis?
It can. So dialectical behavior therapy is an amazing intervention created by Marshall Linehan and expanded by a number of brilliant people. DBT is really great. It's a very intensive treatment, right? Like, so it's sort of, it's like the kitchen sink of psychotherapies. And that's not making fun of it. That's just sort of like being, if anybody really knows DBT, it's like you learn everything. And so in that, it's really effective. It can also be, for some individuals, it's like a lot of therapy. And so you're learning like a gazillion things. I've seen it really effective for some of the individuals that I've served, who could really use that, particularly when emotions are really a big component of it, of like those ups and downs and ups and downs. It's amazing. And then it allows me to do some of the let's get back to your life stuff. So I'm not doing all of the emotion up and down stuff. The DBT takes care of that. But yeah, again, I don't know. I mean, you need to know somebody who also knows psychosis. I mean, DBT doesn't like wholesale do it. I would also say if you were like, I can't find any CBT for psychosis, if a DBT program would be willing to serve somebody with psychosis, that would probably be where I would send my loved one if there was like no other CBT for psychosis person and they're willing to do it because they do really good chain analysis. So they kind of figure out what's going on. So,
All right. Last question. I'm going to paraphrase this. For those of us who experience mania, manic episodes, is there any advice you have, recommendations for, especially with the motivation, becoming too motivated and then overdoing it and going back into psychosis? For those of you who
yeah,
sometimes can be a little too motivated at times.
yeah. So the first thing I would also say is the first book that came out in this series was called Living Well with Bipolar Disorder, which was by David Micklewitz, and it's actually a really great book. It's a good read. Um, and so but David's work has been groundbreaking and evidence-based. Um, and so I think that it can be really helpful, but it's in the same series as Living Well with Psychosis. But it really kind of talks about how to manage those things. I think the smallest one is one of the, and I wish there's a way that we can learn this lesson without bringing shame into it. Because one of my friends right now, she has this enormous shame when she starts going into hypomania, like she did something wrong, and that makes me super sad um, for her. And so, but she also started kind of really embodying this idea of mania kind of operates under this use it or lose it idea, right? When we start feeling manic, we start going, oh, I finally got energy. I better use it before I lose it, right? And so we use it and use it and use it and use it and use it before we lose it, right? And what happens is we upend the apple cart on all of the biological side, right? And that's your sleep, that's your eating, that's your exercise, that's your like all of the stuff that keeps us sort of like circadianly chill. And that's the stuff that kind of helps to manage our mania, right? And so, like as you guys know better than I do, right? As the captains of your ships, um, the one of the tricks of mania is not controlling that horse, but making sure that horse is on a really tight sort of bridle, right? Or whatever the thing is that I'm not a horseman either, but like to really make sure that the horse knows where it's supposed to be going. And so when we start feeling that coming on, we want to go, okay, the energy will be there in the morning, right? I know it'll be so setting those timers, making sure we're getting the sleep. Are we going to get less sleep? For sure, right? Because we've got the fire going, right? And so we're kind of like in a Prometheus moment, like we're touching the fire, but not driving into that activity that gets us excited, not doing those things until the wee hours of the morning, which really upends the apple cart. So in those times, locking in your biologics and monitoring your schedule, and then reaching out to your doctor to go, hey, I've been trying to monitor it through my sleep work and my eating and exercising and all that stuff, and it feels like it's getting away from me. And just sort of at that point, there's obviously I know there's sort of pharmacological things that they do to sort of like reset the sleep part of it if you want. But I think just reminding yourself the energy being there in the morning, right? So
Well, I'm gonna draw us to a close. I think we could talk all night about this subject.
thank you guys.
Before we close it up, I Dr. Brennan is a great friend of NAMI, and as I said earlier, when we lost him briefly with technology, that NAMI is a peer-led organization. We believe in the model of that we are the captains of our own ship. That we are the experts. That we should be driving our recovery, especially as peers like myself. But I want to remind everybody that for registering for tonight's session, you will receive the PowerPoint presentation that Dr. Brennan shared with us. I'll be emailing you that when I receive it from Dr. Brennan. I also want to remind you that we have groups for both peers and family members. They are free. Uh, Suicide Prevention Month is coming up in September. We will be out in the community talking about that for those of us who don't make, for those of us who deal with psychosis and those of us who don't, who have mental health issues and also deal with suicidal ideations like myself. This is a month where we talk about it and normalize it. A lot of people have suicidal ideations, and suicide is a prominent thing with people with mental health issues. So we want to remind you of that. That we do these sessions hopefully monthly during the year, and we're always open for suggestions for other topics. But we appreciate Dr. Brennan tonight. And one plug for ourselves. We will be hosting our fourth annual Glow Walk this Saturday, October 4th at Scarlett Bennett's Labyrinth. For all of you signed up for this are on the newsletters. That information will be continue to be fed to you on Mondays and Wednesdays about both what we're doing at NAMI and what our community partners are doing. But with that, I want to thank Dr. Brennan. I want to thank you all for taking the time to support our programs. And we really appreciate you coming tonight and just being part of the NAMI family. And again, Aaron, I really appreciate the time you took and the book that you've written and some of the assistance that you got from certain people about the cover, etc. We
Yeah, yeah.
appreciate that. So I want to I want to thank you very much for it, Dr. Brennan.
Oh, thank you guys every so much. I'll see you guys soon. Bye.
Take care.